Hello, everybody.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, everyone. I'm really sorry about that. A little bit of a glitch. I hope everybody did not get deafened during that moment. We're about to begin our second webinar in the early childhood mental health webinars for this fiscal year. Our topic is self-regulation, and Connie Herman from the Saskatchewan Prevention Institute, there she is, will be presenting to you today. We will have the same thing happen as with other webinars, where you'll have a chance to ask questions using the chat box, which you all can see at the end of the presentation, but please type them whenever you're ready so you don't lose your train of thought. Also, if you have any audio issues or any issues at all, you can use the chat box and I'll be answering using a different computer. And finally, at the end of the presentation, we will be going through somewhat of an evaluation, so please stay online until after all questions have been answered so that you can do that for us. It just helps us to plan for future presentations in this area. Thank you very much, and without further ado, here's Connie.
Great, thank you, Lee. And thank you all for tuning in to listen to this webinar on self-reg, specifically Shanker self-reg. So my name is Connie Herman, like Lee mentioned, and I am the Nobody's Perfect Parent Program Coordinator for Saskatchewan. So a lot of you are familiar with Nobody's Perfect. If you have any questions about that, feel free to email me if you have any questions about what Nobody's Perfect is. As well, there is some information on our website about that. But one of my roles, along with providing the Nobody's Perfect facilitator training in Saskatchewan and supporting Nobody's Perfect facilitators, is also to provide ongoing professional development opportunities for people who are supporting families. And in my process of looking at different trainings and programs and resources that are available for service providers, I came across SelfReg. And it has fit perfectly with the Nobody's Perfect program. And I found it to be so powerful in so many areas. And so that really is my hope for you, that you'll find it powerful or inspirational for yourself, as well as you'll be able to use it in the work that you do. So SelfReg is a program developed by Stuart Shanker, and it does talk about self-regulation and a process to use, or a process for self-regulating yourself and for using it with others as well. And like Lee mentioned, if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to write them in the chat box, and I will try to get to them at the end of the presentation. So thank you again for joining me. This is my very first webinar, so I am a little bit nervous and a little bit new to this. I'm very familiar with doing presentations in large groups, and that is my preference because I can kind of read the group and have conversations. So this is definitely a little bit different for me, where it's all just me talking, but we'll see how it goes here. So there we go. So we're talking about Shanker self-reg, and self-regulation is a word that's commonly used, especially in our society right now. It's a popular term that's being used, but there's actually 400 different definitions that can be found on self-regulation. So the Shanker self-reg definition is that self-reg is a very powerful method developed by Dr. Shanker for understanding stress and managing energy flow and to promote self-regulation. That's the self-reg definition, and it is, his organization is the Merit Center So there's lots of trainings and resources available through the Merit Center. That's where I took my facilitator training, and it's been a very powerful experience for me. So I will talk a little bit about that at the end of the program as well, or at the end of this webinar. SelfReg is not another program that's out there. It's actually a framework or a way of thinking about yourself, others, and the world. And it really puts pieces of research and theory and best practices that are out there into one way of looking at things, a framework for how to look at things. And that's really the 5-step process that we will go through in this webinar. So that's one of the things that I love about it, is that it combines so much that is out there right now, and we've really made huge advancements in science and neuroscience about the brain and the brain-body connection in the last several years, and it's really trying to help provide a process or framework to put all that information into how to use that information for ourselves and for others. So one of the biggest parts of learning about SelfReg is to first start with redefining stress. So when I ask people what they think of as stress, typically they think of kind of those things like paying the bills, postpartum depression, big crowds at Christmas time, or a lot of work that you have piled up at your office. So those are kind of the big things that people come up with. And it's all those big adult responsibility type things that we have in our lives. They don't often think of stress as something that like kids have or little things that are happening. It's always almost associated with something bad. And stress can be much more than that. So it can be the video games that a kid is playing. It can be what we're hearing on the news, the way that we're reacting to what we're hearing on the news. It can be pollution. It can be boredom, can be stressful. So it can be a lot more things. It can be technology. It can be trying to get your parents' attention, like that little girl on the monkey bars. It can be lots of activities for children, and it can even be the food that we're eating or the coffee that we're drinking. Whoops, what did I do here? Okay, there we go. I got it. Stress can be positive as well. It can be things like getting up and doing a presentation, like me doing this webinar. I have to be a little bit stressed. I have to have a little bit of energy and tension to present to you. It can be exercising. So when we're exercising, we're actually stressing our bodies. We're breaking down muscles so that they can grow bigger. And it can even be things like that we might associate with being calm can actually be stressful for some people. So being out in nature or meditating may be relaxing for one person, but can be stressful for another person. So even as you're looking at this screen here, there's a lot of stuff going on. And I did that purposely to recognize that too much information can be stressful. When we're trying to process a lot of stuff going on, that can be stressful. And even just watching the screen, there's a lot of stuff, so it can be hard to kind of pay attention to what's going on. And Stuart Shanker defines stress as anything that requires our internal systems to burn energy in order to maintain some sort of internal balance. So if we think about ourselves as a thermometer, say for example, where we're set on an automatic, where we're set for wanting to be at, like, say 23.5, if things around us get too cold, we will automatically kind of start to try to produce more heat. Our body will try to produce more heat. Or if we start to get hot, we'll sweat. Our body will naturally try to regulate. Energy and tension in our body does this all the time. We're always trying to meet the state of energy and tension that we want to be at. And as we move through our day, we're constantly experiencing different and varying energy and tension levels or states of arousal. And we're trying to adjust ourselves. So when we wake up in the morning, if we're feeling too tired, we take a cup of coffee to try and increase our energy. If we're needing to relax, you might watch a show or do something in the evening. We're always trying to adjust our energy and tension levels. And that really is basically what stress is, the state of energy and tension that we have and our state of arousal. So if you really think about it, we always have stress. And actually, if we didn't have stress, we'd be dead. Basically, that would be the opposite of what stress is. We always have some sort of stress that we're internalizing. And as I go through this, we'll talk about the different levels of where you feel and experience stress. So, stress, like I mentioned, can be both negative or positive. It can be overt or hidden as well. So stress can be very obvious to us, or it may be something that takes a long time to try to figure out. And when we're thinking about children, we often have assumptions of what is stressing this child out if we're seeing certain behavior, but it may actually be something else, and it may take a long time to kind of figure it out as well, or it might be very simple. So what is a stressor for one child may not be for another, and even for the same child, what may be a stressor in one moment may not be in another when the child is in a different physical or emotional state. And when you think about yourself, this may be true or it is true as well, where you at one moment you may not find something stressful, but in a different situation or a different time you may find it really stressful. So even thinking about when you are with your kids and they're having a temper tantrum, if you've been taking good care of yourself, you're in a positive emotional state, you may not find it that stressful. If you've had a long day, then it may be just kind of that little straw that kind of sets you over, or makes you kind of start to yell or react in a way that you wouldn't normally want to react. So there we go. Okay. So before I go on, I want to just tell you a little bit about my journey into self-reg and my experiences with why I think it's so powerful. So when I first heard Dr. Shanker speak, it was in 2008, and I was pregnant at the time with my first child. I heard him speak at a conference I think it was in Calgary, a children's conference, and he started to talk about stress as being a stress behavior instead of misbehavior. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few moments. But it was just such a powerful aha moment for me. And he would talk about even the people that were attending the presentation, how some people were putting their hand on their head, and that didn't necessarily mean a sign that they didn't want to be there, but they were trying to do what they could to regulate their emotions or their energy level, stress and energy. So that was a really powerful powerful moment for me, and listening to the information that he was giving on brain development. So even when I was in university, a lot of information that was out there about child development was talking about, nature and nurture, and really what was it. And now, once we started to learn a lot more, we started to realize science was proving to us that it was definitely this combination, right, of things. And the more we learned about brain science was that we're learning more about how much the body and brain are connected and how much of it is connected to our behavior. And really the solution to a lot of this is self-regulation. So I'm just going to go into a little bit about what happens in the brain when we do experience stress. So here's a picture of the brain. This is really a model, the triune brain model developed by Paul MacLean. And we know that the brain is much more complex than this. However, it's a great way of just getting basic understanding of what is happening when we do experience stress. And I'm going to use the hand-brain model by Dan Siegel to kind of illustrate about what is happening when we experience stress. And you can Google Dan Siegel brain hand model, and he has a short video that comes up that's very good as well. But I'll try to do him justice as well. So if you think about your hand as a brain, kind of like, let's see if I can do this. There we go. I think that kind of, hopefully you guys can see that. So this part here is the brain stem. This part in here is the limbic system. And this part on top is the neocortex. So our brain stem, or the reptilian brain, also called the instinctual or dinosaur brain, is sending messages back and forth from the brain to your body all the time. So it's telling you how to breathe, your heart to beat, all those things that you naturally don't have to think about. And isn't it wonderful that we don't have to think about all of that, because we have a lot of other stuff going on that we don't want to spend all our time doing all that work. So our brain stem is doing all that work for us, sending those messages back and forth. In the limbic system is where we're kind of regulating, or where we're managing our emotions, or where our emotions are held and experienced. And then on top is the neocortex, and right in the very front is the prefrontal cortex. Do it that way. And this prefrontal cortex is how we regulate our emotions. So it's the part that kind of tells us if we hear a noise that don't worry, it was just a door slamming outside, or if we see something in the dark that we realize it was just a cat running by. It's that logical part of our brain that helps to regulate those emotions. And when we are experiencing too much stress, too much emotions, too much things going on, too much distractions, too much responsibilities, where we're sick, all of those things, our prefrontal cortex actually becomes so strained that it kind of quits working, and we flip our lid. And this is just a great model to show even kids. And I showed my son right when he was as early as 4 years old. And this was really helpful for him to be able to understand about what, if I was yelling, I would say, Levi, I'm about to flip my lid. And even just saying that would help me to calm down, to help me realize what was happening. And Dan Siegel says, if you name it, you can tame it. So that's really, if you can say, okay, I'm going to flip my lid, that actually gives me that moment to stop, slow down, take a breath, pause, and help the prefrontal cortex to come back online so that I can kind of think more rationally of the situation. Now, if I keep getting upset and not recognizing how I'm behaving and taking that moment to breathe, to calm down, then it just keeps escalating. And the thing about young children is that this part of their brain is not developed yet. And it really doesn't fully develop until they're well into their 20s. So as adults, it's really important for us to basically be that prefrontal cortex for our children. And it has to start with us. And that's really a lot about what SelfReg is about. Is first of all, we have to really control or regulate our emotions first and foremost, so that we can help our children to regulate their emotions. And definitely, but for me, I've found, and for what I've learned about the brain-body connection, is how important breathing is to help that to happen. So what happens when we are in that kind of big limbic state, also known as red brain, is we experience either the fight, flight, or freeze. And so we will either start to yell or act out aggressively, or we'll try to flight, leave the situation, avoid, all of those flight type of reactions, or freeze if we're really, really afraid and in fear, we can freeze and not know what to do. So that's what happens to the brain when we're in stress overload, is we either fight, flight, or freeze. And definitely I would suggest, again, just checking out the Dan Siegel hand model, and if you have young children or if you're working with parents, to teach them that. It's a great way to learn about what's happening in the brain, to understand why we react the way we do. And just a little plug, we have a book coming out hopefully in the new year, called My Curious Brain, that helps to explain this and helps children as well as adults and caregivers and teachers to understand and to explain what is going on in the brain. And it basically uses the triune brain model as a metaphor for describing it. So stay tuned for that as well. So the Shanker Self-Reg 5 steps, and really this is the core of what Shanker Self-Reg is about, there's 5 steps, and in order they are: reframe the behavior. That's a big part of it. It definitely has to, and I'll go into what that means in a minute. Then recognize the stressors. And once you can recognize the stressors, you naturally leads you into reducing the stressors. Then reflect, which is enhancing your stress awareness. So think mindfulness type of thing. And then step 5 is respond. So developing personalized strategies to promote resilience and restoration. And I like this visual of it because it shows that it's not necessarily a linear approach. So it's, even though those are the steps in those order, it doesn't have to happen in that order. And quite often you're doing 1 or 2 of the steps at the same time, or more. So it can happen really quick where you're going between the different steps. So I do like this for that reason, this graphic. There we go. Okay, so when you're looking at these steps, the self-reg does begin with self. And this was when I started doing the foundations training, which is the first training, and it's all online. It was all about me. And that, at first I was kind of like, well, I want to learn how to help other people. But we went through each of the steps, and we really would spend months looking at our situations, our experiences, in order to understand it for ourselves. And that was a very powerful process. And once we understand it for ourselves, it's much easier to understand it for others. The other aha moment that I had was the term soft eyes. And really this has been kind of an essence of what self-reg has been for me, is the term soft eyes. It was a term that Susan Hopkins, who is the executive director of the Merit Center, she got this term from an elder when she was working up north. And for me, soft eyes just means, looking at yourself without judgment, with love and kindness, and kind of taking a step back from what is the behavior and all of that kind of stuff, and kind of just looking at it from a step back and with love and kindness. And you're doing this for yourself and for others. So it really has been the beginning of my journey as self-reg, was definitely first and foremost looking at it for myself and how I am always being affected by stress or energy and tension around me, and how to understand that better, what's happening, and how to respond to that. So the quote here is, "For we can only help another find calmness if we ourselves remain calm and find the interaction soothing for both of us." And I think this is why it has been it has had so much success across the country. Self-reg is in many of the schools, in many of the provinces. and internationally too, that once people really understand it for themselves, then it's much easier for them to be able to apply it. So step 1, reframe the behavior. And when you see a child differently, you see a different child. And again, like I mentioned, this was the very first big aha moment for me, was just even that term of it's not stress behavior, or it's not misbehavior, it's stress behavior. And when I was able to start to reframe that in my children's lives, noticed that it automatically made me react differently. It helped me to put those soft eyes on. So if we see a behavior as a child is trying to misbehave, if they're trying to get away with something or they're being bad, then we react with punishment. We react with anger. We react with frustration. But when we see it as stress behavior, we put on those soft eyes, and we are much more willing to look beneath the surface of what's really going on. Reframing helps make the picture more clear. So basically kind of what I was saying was we see that there's much more going on if it's not that this child is just being bad. And in self-reg, we pause, say, why am I seeing this behavior and why now? Before we react. So I'll give you a couple examples in my life, and one was not so long ago. My son came home from school and was yelling at me because of the lunch that I had made. He didn't like it, and the sandwich was soggy or something like that. And my initial reaction was just to want to yell and to say, you should be more grateful. Like, I put a lot of work into this. Mornings are stressful, and maybe you could start making your own lunch. But I didn't. I took that moment to pause and to think, and I recognized that this isn't typically like him. So I took that moment to say, did something happen at school? And right away, instantly, he broke down, and he was talking about an experience at school where he felt he was being teased. And we were able to really connect and talk about it. And if I had not taken the time to recognize that I was about to flip my lid, and to recognize that this behavior was stress behavior for him as well, then we would have lost that moment. We would have not been able to work through the stress as readily as we were able to. So it's really about doing that all the time whenever we're experiencing those moments where someone else is reacting in a way to us that we think that they're being a jerk or they're being bad or whatever it is, to take that moment to stop and say, what's really going on here? Why is this person reacting the way they are towards me? And to not take it so personally. So, and just going back to that even too, I use this in my marriage all the time too, right? So if my husband were to say something to me that I didn't really necessarily appreciate in the morning, I might think, okay, he didn't really get much sleep last night. I think that that's what's going on beneath this, right? Or even with my daughter, who is maybe whining before we go to school, to instead reacting to that as being annoying, to recognize what is she really saying here. And in most cases, even things like whining, young children are asking you for attention. They're wanting your love and attention. So being able to just recognize that helps me to respond to her needs once I better understand that. So once we understand that it's not misbehavior, that it is stress behavior, it naturally leads into step 2. We're naturally more open to trying to figure out what is going on and to recognizing the stressors. So this is a tool that you can use, the 5 primary domains of stress. And there's 5 primary domains of stress. The first is biological. So that is anything that you're experiencing with your senses. So think noise or sounds, smells, tastes, things that we're hearing, all of those sensory type things. So noises, crowds, too much visual stimulation, not enough exercise, if we're sick, all of those things that we're experiencing on a biological level. And what you experience may not be the same as what another person experiences. So what might be stressful, sensory stress for you may not be for another. So for example, I am very sensitive to sound, whereas my husband is not sensitive at all and has a hard time hearing. So that can become even kind of a social stressor for us because we're having two different stresses. So it can be a lot of different things. And the other one is emotional. So think strong emotions, and this can be both positive or negative emotions. So when we're really excited about something, or we get really hyper, or we can't wait for things to happen. Think Christmas with kids, and they're getting so excited, and it kind of just explodes eventually because there's so much stress that they're experiencing, even though it's happy. Eventually, it can take its toll as well. It can also be negative, so anger, fear, sadness, all of those types of emotions as well. It can be cognitive. So when we think cognitive, we often think, what are we thinking? The thoughts that we're thinking. So it can be that, but really it is also the way that we're processing information. So one way that a person might learn something might be really easy for one person to learn something, say for example math, whereas it may be really hard for another person to learn it as well in the same way, or they may need to learn it in a different way. It's how we're processing information. And then the other is social. So difficulty picking up on social cues is an example, or understanding the effect of your behavior on other people. Pro-social is when it's basically empathy. So it's how we deal with other people's stress. So for example, I have a hard time listening to the news. So I just kind of quit listening to the news because I feel like I can't do anything about all the things that are happening out there that are very negative and having a lot of stress on a lot of people. It can also be things like going to the hospital, being around other people that are experiencing stress. So even though there's the 5 different domains, the reality is that they don't exist in isolation. So I've put them all in this little beaker box or container, whatever that beaker I think it's called, so to show you how they are not isolated. So whenever we're experiencing something emotionally, think the brain hand model. We're always experiencing it on different levels as well. And one of the biggest things that another aha moment for me is that whenever we're experiencing any of these stresses, we always experience it on a biological level. So that gives us a note or something to work with, that we can always start there. So think deep breathing, right? To calm our heart rate down, to calm our breathing down, to help the oxygen get back into our brain. Because if we're not breathing well, then there's not as much oxygen going to our brain, and we kind of get caught up in that fight, flight, or freeze reaction. So once we start to look at the different domains and start to recognize what the stressors are, it's really where we're starting to be a stress detective. And I love that term because it kind of takes the judgment away again, that we're just really trying to figure out what's going on. And I love this graphic as well. And these graphics, many of them are available on the Merit Center website, which is just www.selfreg.ca. And this one talks about behavior being communication. So when we see behavior as being communication, we start to figure out, okay, let's figure out what this person is really trying to say. Let's figure out why I'm reacting the way I am. Let's figure out why my child is having temper tantrums instead of just trying to control it. And typically what we see is, or quite often in our society, what we do is we just look at the top parts, this behavior part. And that's that behavior that we maybe don't like. And if we're just reacting to that behavior, then we're using punishments to try to make the behavior stop, or we're using rewards to try to make other behavior, positive behavior happen. So we're just reacting quite often to the behavior that's happening. But when we start to recognize, when we think about it as an iceberg, we realize that there's so much beneath the surface, that there is those biological and emotional and social and prosocial and cognitive stressors, and we start to kind of explore what those might be, then we are looking at it from a stress detective perspective. We're trying to really identify what's really going on for this child or for ourselves or for the other person that we're working with. And that naturally, once we start to identify what the stressors are, it naturally leads into wanting us or giving us insight into how to reduce those stressors. So I love this cartoon. Just says that I'm learning how to relax, doctor, but I want to relax better and faster, and I want to be on the cutting edge of relaxation. So this is typically quite often where our society goes, or where we want this magic pill. We want this, 5 steps to success, to losing weight, to whatever it is, to getting my kid to sleep at night. We want all these quick and easy, fast solutions. And self-reg can be that, but it's not. It's not 5 steps. It can be a quick solution if you really do quickly identify what the stressor is, but it can also take time. And it's not a program like that where you can get those quick fixes. And the reality is because what works for one person may not work for another. And so there's lots of different ways to solve different problems out there, but people have to kind of figure out what works for them. And as a society, we often say you should do this. Like, I was just on Facebook the other day, and it was like, right within a few minutes, I got all these advertisements, and one was, I realized that I wasn't getting enough calories or I wasn't getting enough carbohydrates, and the next one was keto, and it was like, don't eat any carbohydrates, only protein. So you get so many messages out there in our society about what we should be doing, and really self-reg is trying to let's take a deep breath, let's leave that, move away from that and try to figure out what is best for you. And that means really getting in touch with what is going on for you or what's going on with the child, instead of all these, you should be doing this, right? Because when we think about how we start to feel when we're being told what you should do or what you need to do or what you can't do, right? It's just that extra pressure that adds to the stress, that helps, that just, again, causes us to feel more out of control, and more, the limbic alarms start to go off even more. So self-reg is a process. It's not a packaged program that comes complete with a predefined set of regulating tools. And there are lots of tools and great tools and programs out there, but that would fit into the framework of self-reg. So this is just a chart that I've put up here to kind of give you an idea of how you can start to look at ways to identify, or how to start looking at the process. So what works for you, again, may not work for another person. So for example, I may know that I need to eat certain foods in order to feel good, but another person might be allergic to those foods, which an allergy is a stressor. So they would need to avoid those. So it's just kind of figuring out the puzzle for yourself in all of these different areas. And this is where you kind of think about self-control versus self-regulation. And in self-regulation, a lot of people do kind of think of self-regulation as self-control. But with Dr. Shanker, he's really recognized that self-regulation kind of needs to come first. And that if we are able to self-regulate ourselves, then we are able to have self-control in a lot of areas. So I think about myself, if I'm really stressed about something, I'm much more likely to go for, the ice cream in the fridge than I would if I'm feeling really good and healthy and positive. I might be much more likely to go for the salad or something healthy. So I might also be much more likely to want to grab something quick and easy than if I was feeling like calm and relaxed. I might be much more willing to cook something for myself. So really that's the difference between self-control and self-regulation with the Shanker self-reg. And really when we think about parenting, the school system, everything, right? Even healthcare, really we are a self-control society. We're all about like telling people what to do and control your emotions. But when the alarms are going off, we don't have that capacity. This part of our brain is not working. And so it's really hard. We have to take extra energy to sit there and calm down. So for the child who still doesn't have this part of their brain developed, think about if they're hungry, if they have, too much energy and tension in their bodies and they need to be moving and they're sitting there trying to sit still in their desk at class, and that takes up so much energy for them. And so that can have a ripple effect for them as well and can have negative consequences as well. And step 4 is to become aware of our states of energy. So it's reflect. And this really I think of mindfulness with this. So this is a tool that you can use. It's the Thayer matrix, and it defines tension and energy in 4 different states. So if you look up at the top left quadrant there, that is high energy and low tension. So, that's when we're feeling really good, but we don't really have a lot of stress on our plate, or so-called, I guess, tension on our plate, where we're, I think about when I'm out boating or something, right? When life just seems really good and I'm relaxed, but I still have lots of energy. Then when you're looking at the lower left, actually, let's go over to the upper right quadrant there, where we have high energy and high tension. So that is where we still have lots of energy, but we have a lot of tension too. So we got the nerves happening. We got anger maybe happening. We got some kind of like just those big emotions that we don't necessarily know how to contain happening. So it can be, again, it can be positive as well. That can be the state where we are, running a race or doing a presentation or going for a job interview, where we're excited maybe, but we also have a lot of energy and tension. It can also be where we feel really overwhelmed and angry too. So and we don't know what to do with that high energy and high tension. The low energy, low tension in the left lower quadrant is where we are really relaxed and life is going pretty good, where we are restoring our energy. So that's really where it can be where we're sleeping. If we're, having a good sleep, it can be things like meditating. It can be just taking that time to relax, this is really the quadrant where we are restoring our energy. So it's a really important quadrant and one that we often, if we're in that high energy, high tension, right, maybe we need to go down to that left lower quadrant in order to kind of restore that energy, because we use up a lot of energy in the upper quadrant. The lower right quadrant is the low energy, high tension. So that's really where we're in those low spaces where maybe at the end of the day where we've exerted so much energy throughout the day and we just don't have anything else to give. And you go home and, the kids are crying or wanting supper and you just don't feel like you have any more to give. It can even be where you're looking at things like depression as well too. But this is a good tool to use for when you're just going throughout the day, just to see where you're at. Like take a moment right now, just take a deep breath in and kind of just feel into where your body is right now. Think about how much energy and tension you have in your body right now. And you can feel tension, in your muscles. I know I feel it in my shoulders when I have too much stress going on in my life. I feel it in my shoulders. Other people might feel it in their stomach or headaches. You can experience stress or energy and tension in a lot of different ways. And it can be really good or it can be not so great. It can feel like pain. It can feel like, just kind of feel into your body and see what you're feeling right now. That helps you when you can kind of tune into that. It helps you to automatically kind of move into where do I need to be? What do I need to do to get there? So maybe you need to have a glass of water. Maybe you need to have a little bit of a walk or a break. And when you can really kind of be mindful of that, it can help you to kind of figure out that stress, that how to adjust or to regulate your energy and tension. So when I started doing this, I would do this like all the time throughout the day. I'd always be doing it, and it just becomes more and more automatic. And you might need to kind of like take time throughout the day where you even set it on your phone to just start to do this, where you're starting to understand where your energy and tension levels are. And again, it's just one tool. There's lots of different tools that are out there. And another one that I've seen is the zones of regulation, which helps. It's often used in schools where it helps children to understand where their stress levels are and where they need to go and what they can do to get there. And step 5 is respond. So developing personalized strategies to promote resilience and restoration. So this is really like I've gone through all these 4 steps and I'm kind of starting to get an understanding of stress and energy and tension in my life and what really works for me. So it can be things that you do on a daily basis. So for myself, I've learned that I need to get up before my kids do in order to kind of fill up my bucket or to recharge my batteries, to have that time to myself where it's quiet and I can do whatever I need to do. I can exercise, I can write, I can plan for the day, I can get the lunches ready where it's quiet. Because I don't get a lot of quiet time in my life and I realize that I need that. So that's the one time of the day where I can get that. And it can also be in a yearly basis, like even thinking about, recognizing what months are really stressful and how to adjust your calendar for that. I've recognized that I often got sick in, say, end of September, October, and I know that there's a lot more colds going on around this time. So that's partly the environment and things like that, but it's partly also the stress level that people have too in their lives. There's so much on their plate. So for me, I recognized that I needed to adjust my calendar a little bit to not make it so full because I have my kids' events and my work stuff. So I would try to adjust it a little bit to try to prevent those sicknesses from happening and to try to find time throughout the day as well to make sure to restore my batteries. And some of this is really easy when life is going good, when you have not a lot of things on your plate, maybe you're on vacation. A lot of this kind of strategies are easy to do. but it can be more challenging when we're facing kind of those difficult situations in our lives. So, if you think about the metaphor of a sailboat, again, it's easy to be able to sail the boat when the weather is great outside, but it takes a lot of kind of concentration and skills and practice when you're trying to sail the boat during a storm. So the overview of this is just really, again, it's just the cold notes. And a lot of this takes a lot of time and reflection and just thinking about your life and how you apply this, and then thinking about the people closest to you and how you can apply this in their lives as well. And one of the main things for me that I realized is how much it really is about myself. So there would be points where I would say I'd try to start doing self-reg for my children, that they need to do this, but it's really easy to move into that control paradigm, right? That whole self-control, and you think you're doing it for them, that you realize what the stressors are, and so you realize what they need to do, but really it is a process of co-regulation. So it's called self-regulation, but when you think about it in relation to other people, which really we're always interacting with other people, it really is this process of co-regulation. It starts with a self, but you realize that we're each our own individual self. So just as much as I need to figure out what works for me, another person needs to figure out what works for them. And you can do it together, but it has to be with those soft eyes that I talked about. So there are other resources out there if you're interested in learning more about self-reg. One of Dr. Shanker's initial books was called Calm, Alert, and Learning, and this is really in response to helping teachers to learn about self-regulation and how to apply it into their classroom. The other book is Self-Reg, How to Help Your Child and You Break the Stress Cycle and Successfully Engage with Life. And with Dr. Shanker's work, he's worked a lot with children with special needs, particularly, and a lot of the children where they've seen everybody and they don't know what else to do. So they have a whole team of people working with children, and he would have these teams of people working with children, making success and progress with them, but recognize it wasn't what they wanted as much as they wanted to be seeing. So really, at that point, they started to say, well, let's work with the parents. And once they could start teaching the parents all of this stuff, all the self-reg stuff, the changes were dramatic. And they realized how much when parents are calm and happy and self-regulated, how deeply that impacts the children that they have. So same thing with teachers. So for adults, how important it is for us to first and foremost learn to self-regulate for ourselves. So that's really a lot of the book is about the 5 steps of self-regulation, as well as guiding people how to self-regulate themselves. And if you check out online, like I mentioned, the selfreg.ca, there is a lot of opportunities for learning, and a lot of them are free. There are some courses that you can take as well, but there's lots of different opportunities as well to learn more about it. And again, you can always call me or email me, and I would be more than happy to talk more about this. So at this time, I realize I'm a little bit early. I do invite any questions that you guys have. If you have any thoughts, questions, anything that you're wondering about, learning more about.
And please, if you have any thoughts or questions, please type them into the chat box and we'll answer them as we go.
Okay, so I see Lori said, are these books?
I got
you got it? Okay, you got it figured out. Okay.
You're at Mark.
Okay, Mark. Okay, you talked about being the neocortex for children. How might that look for a child with ODD? Oh, okay, so oppositional, what is it? Defiance disorder. Okay, that's, so in listening with Dr. Shanker, he has moved away from using labels wherever possible. So, an oppositional disorder, defiance disorder, is one of those particularly. Um, so again, he would move into the steps of self-reg, and that really a lot of the behavior that you're seeing is because of the stressors that the child is experiencing. So helping the child to, and it depends on the age, I guess, a lot of it too, and where their capacity is, but helping to figure out what those stressors are and to reduce them first and foremost, so that can help the child to calm down. And that once the child is more calm, then it's much easier to engage with them on that logical playing field, so to speak. I don't know if that helps at all. That's the best I got for that one. Okay, so if you need us to, okay, that's you. Anything else? Am I missing another one?
No, not yet. We'll just keep this up for a few minutes because I know that it takes people a while when they have to actually type.
Mm-hmm.
Remember not to sign out until we're finished the questions because we will be doing a small evaluation.
Yes. Carla, sorry, you said that, is this recorded? Because I missed the first part. So yes, it will be recorded. How can they access that?
If you email me, Al Hinton, my email address is already on there, then we'll be able to send it out to you.
So if you didn't hear that, if you email Lee Hinton, like she mentioned up on the top there, her email address is there, she can send that to you. Yes, thank you for attending the slideshow as well.
Will you be providing the slides?
I can provide the slides as well.
Woohoo!
Yay! Another program that I want to just mention quickly is Kids Have Stress Too, is another one that we have been recently trained in. It's a program out of the Psychology Foundation, and myself and another coworker have been doing some trainings around there. So that is a program that really focuses on helping identify or redefine stress. So that would be a huge part of where it's at, and giving some strategies to helping recognize and reducing stressors. And that is another one you can ask me about as well if you have any questions about that. Oh, so in the text it says my furious brain, but it's, yes, my curious brain is hopefully to be out in early 2019. So I'm hoping, fingers crossed, for January. It's a book that was developed by Kids First in the Sunrise Health region, and is that right? Yeah. Okay. So and they have given the resource to us. So we've revised it a bit, and we'll be able to offer it because of our capacity at the Saskatchewan Prevention Institute to develop and to distribute resources. We'll be able to offer it at a much more feasible amount, so it won't cost nearly as much, and it's just more within our capacity to offer this resource than the Kids First did. So we're excited about that resource. Okay. So I'm not sure. I'm hoping I can answer this right. So you wanted to kind of have me speak about soft eyes versus empathy and projecting. Okay. Good question. So I would say soft eyes is a bit more detached. So yeah, there still is maybe a level of empathy there, but it's a little bit more detached. So it's kind of that curious brain. But and just like really what's going on, just like kind of non-judgmental at all. So not offering judgment that oh, poor you or poor me kind of thing, but also just saying, okay, let's really kind of like breathe into this and taking that moment to pause, calm down, and to step back and say and kind of assess the situation. So say for example, I was yelling at my child and I caught myself. And at first I might be really likely to beat myself up, right? To say, oh, Connie, you know better. You shouldn't be doing this. Why are you yelling? Or I might be like, oh yeah, this kid deserves to be yelled at, but instead it's just like, okay, take that deep breath, pause, calm down, and say, okay, yeah, that's a fact is that I did yell at my child. The fact is that I'm stressed. And the fact is that I don't want to yell at my child. And, that's all, it's just kind of like stepping back from it and looking at it objectively. And then to say, okay, how can I move forward in a much more self-regulated way? I don't know if that makes sense. Does that make sense? Yeah. It's kind of a hard concept to explain, soft eyes. So yeah, just feel into it. I don't know if that helps.
And after that,
Okay.
So
Mm-hmm. Esther, I would love to talk to you a bit more about that if you wanted to message me. So you asked about autism. Oh, okay, missed it there. But basically, again, it's kind of with self-reg, the process is the same for everybody, but you have to learn about different things for different people, right? So, learning about autism and the way it affects a child is very important when you're looking at self-regulation, or it could be anything, whatever it is. Looking at toddlers and temper tantrums or teenagers and really understanding what's going on in the brain and the neuroscience behind it. So really it is about kind of understanding the neuroscience behind everything for that individual. So again, with autism, it can look in so many different ways, but it's hard for me to answer that. Okay. And I think I missed a couple questions.
Mark.
Okay.
Right after Esther.
Okay.
Do you want me to read it to you?
Yeah.
There are lots of medications that are prescribed for children around behavior. Where might those fit in a conversation around self-reg?
Okay. I guess in understanding really what the real stressors are. So if it is, so it's not to say that medication is bad, right? I'm not saying that at all. But is it is it just in relation to trying to fix the behavior, or is it really in helping to reduce a stressor? So, you think heart medication, well, you need that, right? If it's about the behavior, is there something else that's going on that could be done as well or in lieu of the medication? And again, that is part about being a stress detective, and the ideal is that the medical profession will kind of catch up with this way of thinking, and more doctors I think are, and understanding the impacts that stress can have and working with people. And the thing that I really love about the idea of self-reg and the idea of everybody kind of understanding this process is that it's much easier to talk with teachers and for parents to have conversations with teachers and for parents and teachers to interact about what's really going on in the school, as well as the medical profession. So to better understand, have those bigger conversations with parents and with people when you're experiencing stress in your life. So what's happening beneath the surface, and let's not just deal with, the symptom that you're having. Because just like behavior is communication, our bodies are communication too. So our bodies are saying things to us about stresses that we're experiencing. We just don't always understand what it is. So I guess that's best I can do that.
So your next question is, can you explain further the difference, can you explain for self-regulation versus self-control?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so self-control is like, I really want to do this, but I'm going to force myself not to. Right? There's an aspect of kind of force and manipulation, kind of when you think about self-control. Whereas self-regulation is understanding that I have this energy and tension, and what can I do to help to release it or to move it to a place where I feel that calm and relaxed and focused. So that therefore I don't want to do that anyways, or even if I do want to, it's about the energy and tension. So really self-regulation is about kind of finding a way to restore that energy, to find that calm, to find a way to feel like you're good in your body and around in your environment. Whereas self-control is more about kind of that action of you do. Okay, and Maria, keep going. Can you hear me now? Can anybody give me a thumbs up? Okay,
there you
awesome. Go. So, did you hear my spiel about how important the education system is? Was that lost? No. Okay. So I'll go back to that really quickly, as I was talking about how with the Merit Center, they really do want to promote everybody learning self-reg within the education system. And it needs to be the principals, the teachers, the tutors, the custodians, the bus drivers, everybody, and how important the whole environment is for for children, and really the focus is on, we're not just educating children, we're helping to develop their mental and emotional well-being as well. So how important self-reg is for that process, and it's on all levels. And Dr. Shanker really believes that this is a revolution. It's, he doesn't talk about it as a paradigm shift. For him, it's a revolution. It's a very different way of thinking, and than how we normally think. And it can hopefully start to catch on once we're all kind of, it takes a shift, and once we all kind of start to see things a little bit differently, that empowers us to make changes for ourselves and for our children.
Okay. You're frozen. I don't know why. But your audio's still working. So we're just going to take a moment. Definitely, if anybody else has any questions, please.
Okay.
Please type them, and before I leave, I'll make sure that I copy them into an email for Connie, so that she'll be able to hopefully answer them. And for now, we're just going to do a quick poll. There are several of these. I'll open them one at a time, and if I could have you answer them, that would be helpful, especially in doing future webinars. I just want to thank Connie. This is the first time I've heard this presentation. Look at that. But this is the first time I've heard this presentation as well. And I thought it was quite amazing. So thank you very much, Connie.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for...
You're frozen.
Oh,
no.
Okay.
Okay. So for our polls, the first poll is about attending the presentation. So what I would like to know is, has attending the presentation been a good use of your time? So you can see there, or strongly agree to disagree. Once we get some answers going, we'll move to the next one. Okay, since nothing else is coming up right now, I'm going to end this poll and move to the next one. So the next one is, how satisfied were you with the presentation style? Just hold on a minute, I'll drag it into this side. All right. Once again, I'll just pull up the next one for you. The next one is, I gained new information from this presentation. Okay. And just a second. Very hard to follow these. We have two more and that's all. So the next one is I will use this information, or I will use the information I learned from this presentation in the work that I do. Okay, and we have one last question. It is there any topics that you would like to see addressed through these webinars? So for this one, you just type in what the answer would be, what your answer would be in as much detail or as little detail as you want. Last year, the presentation series that is happening right now for this fiscal year, all the presentations are actually based on requests from last year. So this is an important question if you want something specifically addressed. Okay, I'm going to leave this one up probably for the next 10 minutes so you guys can add in as you want to. But I'd like to thank everybody for joining in, for spending time with us, asking questions as needed. I put Connie's email in the chat box, which again, you can copy that and paste it into an email and email her if you have any more questions. I've also put my email address there if you need information about the series in general, or if you would like a certificate. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next month.